All right, welcome back, everybody.
Yes.
Feels great. So, first off, my name's John.
And I'm Wes.
And we are Mobile Arts Programming. And you may have previously heard us with our podcast feature called Bittersweet Stories. So, how about a quick recap on Bittersweet Stories there, Wes?
Yeah. Bittersweet Stories was, I think, a really cool avenue for us to just kind of explore. As we were getting into social services, both you and I come from like a music background, right? And we had just gone to school for child and youth work, started this, at the time it was a for-profit business. It's now a not-for-profit, Mobile Arts Programming, aka MAP.
Mm-hmm. More about that later, by the way.
Yes. But I think what Bittersweet Stories was, for me at least, was just this sort of way to kind of navigate what that sort of world kind of looked like with a lot of the people that we interacted with and a lot of the people that we met. Mm-hmm. And, it was absolutely incredible to hear so many stories from, some of our friends in the industry and some folks who have, taught us so much about what that work looks like, and has been so influential on how you and I move through this space. Mm-hmm. So Bittersweet Stories was awesome. We were, really grateful and really lucky to kind of have some of those conversations and learn from those folks. And then the pandemic happened, and lo and behold, we just kind of put our energy into other things. And here we are now, hopefully post-pandemic. Yeah. And I just knocked on wood for those not watching the video. But hopefully, we're able to move back to in-person stuff and kind of go through all those things. But I think, John, what you and I really wanted to do with the second iteration of this podcast was, go back to our roots, go back to the music, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so this sort of, again, volume 2 for the podcast, we're calling it Music with Map. So for some of you folks who may already know what we do, this is basically the bread and butter. But we felt this was a nice way to kind of reignite the podcast flame for us, and be able to kind of still take that frontline perspective, but instead of just this concept of social work at large and the folks who work within that industry, just, playing a bit more into the idea of the role of music in all of this. And so that is pertaining to us, but then also we really hope to connect with some folks who in various capacities, would work on the front lines, quote, end quote. So that might also mean, someone who is researching the topic, like, maybe they've focused on the cognitive impact of music or anything like that. So we hope to have like a whole bunch of different guests come in and even some musicians talk about, what it's like to tour and stuff like that. So, anyway, it's really exciting. And again, for us, we like to be back in the saddle as far as podcasting goes, but with a different perspective and something that is still an extension of what we do and who we are, but the lens is slightly different, right?
Yeah, I think there's going to be 4 facets to this version of the podcast, at least for the time being. The beautiful thing about this medium, as we've explored through our programs, as we've explored through our own personal interests, is fluid, right? Mm-hmm. So I think for the time being, we're going to kind of focus on 4 different aspects. One is you and I reflecting and talking about music. If anybody listening is willing to share any kind of music that they're into, please hit us up and we'll definitely bring that up on the show. The second part is, as John alluded to, we're going to be talking to some musicians, coming from that world, and a big part of me misses it in a certain respect, and a big part of me doesn't in the same vein. But we're going to talk to some professional musicians who are doing that work and just to, get a sense of what that life is like and what keeps them going day to day. We're going to talk to a lot of folks in the community world. What does it look like running a social enterprise, a not-for-profit who focuses on community engagement through music, right? We know we've come across and worked with a lot of really incredible people in this space. And so we're really excited to have some of them on, have some of those conversations. And I think finally, and I love that you alluded to this one as well, is we're really going to dive into the clinical perspective of what music does to your brain. Right? Why do you like it? What like attracts you to a certain drum beat or a certain riff or, a lyric, right? Like there's different variables in something that's just so subjective, like art and music. And we get a sense through some of these clinical conversations that we're really excited to share with everybody, just why that happens.
Yeah, exactly. So pretty exciting stuff. And again, an extension of, much like the previous version of this podcast, very much an extension of kind of what we're doing already, what we're focusing on, but we're really kind of just diving into it. And something actually interesting that you mentioned earlier is you brought up, I think the word you used was pandemic. It seems unfamiliar to me. Has that been a thing at all? Or maybe, that's right. Yeah, right. And so speaking of music, speaking of, podcasting, speaking of pandemic, and just this notion of within this pandemic, everyone's kind of had to recalibrate themselves in a variety of different ways as a response to what's been going on. So I'd be curious to know, for you, Wes, did your approach to music or playing music, the role of music in your life, did that change at all during this pandemic? Or, did you start listening to music that you never really listened to before? Or did you let music go that you listened to a bunch and you're like, I don't want to listen to this anymore? Like, what's the past 2 years been like for you, specifically within this context?
Well, no, that's a very broad question, but I think one of the biggest transformations for me, man, was I finally broke down and subscribed to like a streaming service, which is like,
have you heard of the internet? It's pretty cool,
man. So
it's amazing. It's this like international database, It's like,
but that's never how I've like accessed it, right? It's always felt kind of weird for me to like, stream something, because I'm the type of person that, when a new album would drop, I'd love to go to the record store, see the album artwork, kind of pull it open, see the liner notes, kind of learn more, and then listen to the album in its entirety. But with streaming services, you kind of just get hit with these singles again and again, and you end up falling in. You don't have to, obviously, but a lot of times you end up falling into just like a playlist. Right. So it's just like you kind of hear the same, or like different versions of the same kind of sounding song.
Yeah.
For like hours on end.
Yeah.
Right. By a million different artists. But so anyways, I finally broke down and kind of jumped on that bandwagon, and it's been cool. It's been cool because I definitely been able to be exposed to music that, I'm not going to be able to purchase in my local like record shop, right?
Right, because it closed up years ago.
Well, I mean that's a part of it, but you know what I'm saying, right? Of like course, it's just like there's this international sort of database all of a sudden where you can connect with somebody making music on an indie level in New Zealand, right? Like, I'm not going to be able to find that album at my local record shop. So just that accessibility is so cool about, and what am I saying here? Of course, like everybody understands this. Like this isn't rocket science.
But I get it because it's, and this is something we've talked about before, is just this notion of the paradigm shift where with streaming, you alluded to this already, even the fact of, well, first off, you're going to hit with so much all at once when you open up whatever streaming service it is. But then also this notion of playlists. Like you might have made a mixtape for your friend when you were younger or something like that. Now it's this curated thing where, someone's making a playlist for you and the algorithms throw it at you. So, to your credit, I think that the streaming service model is definitely very different than going out and buying a record or a CD or whatever of your favorite artist, especially if it's a new release, coming home, like leafing through the booklet, whatever it is. It is very much a paradigm shift. The way that you consume that music and the way it's presented to you is so different. But let me just take this moment to congratulate you, Wes. You did it, man. You did it.
Finally, man. I'm crawling my way out of the Stone Age here.
Yeah.
It's hilarious because with music, like, we work so much with technology, right? Like technology is just a part of what music is now, especially when it comes to recording and engineering and mixing and all of those things. And yet, the whole streaming thing was just so kind of scary and foreign to me. But anyways, I would say throughout the course of the pandemic, that's been one thing that's really changed in the way I consume music. Is just being a part of that bigger thing, right? And I do miss the the record purchase and leafing through that. I mean, I don't miss that purchase financially, but I do miss the sort of like process that that was.
Right.
Because, you're spending like an hour and a half just kind of leafing through that, listening to the whole album, kind of going through it that way. Whereas now I find so often with music streaming, at least, it's just kind of almost a passive activity. Whereas before it was very active. So, just kind of that relationship has been interesting. But what about you, John?
Yeah. So I was going to say too, especially because, you're an audio guy. I wonder if deep down you had this sort of inherent implied resentment for streaming music, because I feel like in the days of Napster and stuff like that, the audio quality was often just garbage, right?
Yes.
So sure, it's like, oh, you can get this album for free, but it sounds like it's coming through like an old time radio, and that's even maybe a best case scenario. So maybe deep down in there, there's this aversion to the idea in general,
Yes, that's a huge part of it, and there's this other like weird sort of like crusader thing that really has no meaning to anything. But I've never downloaded a song in my entire life, like
really
illegally, never once. Working in music and all of those things, like that's the only way artists get paid, right? Unfortunately, the in the past at least, record labels would take the vast majority of that.
Yeah.
But needless to say, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole because that's a whole conversation in itself. But yes, I've conformed to the masses at this point. We're streaming music, baby.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I mean, so I also use streaming services and have for years, and I think ultimately that's because I always carried around one of those massive, like, huge memory iPods, and I got one from a friend because I needed one, and it ended up just kind of biting the dust. And then it was at that point that I realized, wait a second, like my phone can assume this role, and as long as I have an internet connection, which for the most part I do, I'm able to access it. And the cool thing is that it didn't necessarily require the physical memory like the iPod did. And also there's the option then for you to add stuff to your library and even download it. So it's like, in that sense, it's, it's like, okay, this feels similar to the iPod, but it is a very different medium. And I think that as much as I have embraced for a long time, I've embraced, a streaming service, I do still miss the excitement that comes around from a new release and the way that you consume it. And again, I think that is having that tangible good in your hands, leafing through that booklet. Because music doesn't have that visual component to it. So having that booklet just kind of fills in that gap, Streaming, I know like people will have their videos and things like that, but if you're thinking of an entire album, you're not going to have a video for each song. So, but
I think there's also such a value in the lyrical content sans music, right? Like seeing how a writer would put those words together and phrase the lines, and it's poetry, like how they phrase it, just like on the page itself, just physically, let alone how it's phrased vocally in the song, and then how it's supported by all the music underneath. So when reading those sort of lyric booklets, it's just fascinating to kind of go through just the words themselves. And it's hilarious to kind of like see what stands up and what doesn't. I mean, again, it's subjective, right? Like, you can hear the most generic pop song of all time, or, a very like long-winded, beat like folk song, and do the lyrics sort of, again, it's subjective, but it's just cool to kind of like, at least for me, that was one of the aspects that I really enjoyed about kind of the physical part of it too.
Right. And I think it connects with that idea of the visual and how ultimately this visual can work its way into how you appreciate and sort of consume music. And I think that, and then also you bring it to lyrics, which is another thing altogether. So now that's cool. I'm happy for you, man. That's great. And so that's an interesting shift for you. And I think that it reiterates the fact that through this pandemic, a lot of stuff has just inevitably had to move online. So it is fitting that if there were a time for you to go to a streaming service, it's during a pandemic where basically your hand was forced. If you wanted to go down to that local record shop, you couldn't because it was closed. And you were forbidden to leave your home for a period of time. So, yeah, that makes sense. And a great way to respond to the pandemic, I guess, right?
Yes. you know, the thing that we often say, and the motto of MAP right now is one day at a time. So I think that's kind of how we're getting through it from our music consumption as well.
Yeah, one album at a time.
Yeah, one album at a time.
Or one song at a time, maybe even. Yeah.
Yeah. But what about you, John?
Yeah, so I would say actually the thing that was different for me with music during the pandemic is I actually found that there was such a shift, I think, in my day-to-day life that, and because live music stopped being a thing. So I was used to performing, you know, regularly and playing with folks regularly. Even in any given week, I would go out and play music, whether practice or performance, like 1 to 3 times a week. That was kind of just what my week looked like. So for all that to come to a hard stop, it was actually really interesting where I think more so from the context of playing music, it seemed like it came to just a hard stop. And I think I was so used to having it as part of my routine that in the process of redefining what the routine would look like, and I also had a baby, you know, the role of music in my life definitely changed. Not that it increased or decreased necessarily, but it just sort of changed, you know. Again, almost like this general concept of a paradigm shift, where for me, again, it was almost like it wasn't like the table turned. It was just totally a new table altogether. So it just took a minute to kind of figure it out. But so yeah, in terms of listening music or playing music, I would say initially in the pandemic, it felt like things just got busy really quick for me. And then, yeah, having a kid and stuff like that, it was very interesting to just have music almost take a backseat. And so what I think is really nice with this kind of coming around and hopefully feeling like we're, again, you know, knock on wood, hopefully at least for the most part kind of behind the intensity of lockdowns and things like that as it pertains to this pandemic, that it also seems like music is slowly but surely kind of making its way back into the day-to-day or the weekly repertoire just day-to-day activities. So that's really cool. Like I play guitar last week for a couple hours in a row, which is something that was a treat. Like I haven't done that for so long, and my fingers actually were sore. And I was like, that's weird. Like I play guitar for almost 30 years at this point. Like for me to have that happen, that was just strange. So, again, it's just funny how one's life will kind of always undergo various changes, and it's sort of just all a matter of how you respond to it. And I think that music always inevitably ends up being the soundtrack to whatever that is, right? So for me, it was really interesting where, you know, like certain arty films or something like that, where for me, the last couple of years, it was almost like the absence of music, the absence of sound was sort of what ended up being my soundtrack. As strange as that is, you know? So it's kind of funny that you found this avenue of listening to music where there's just endless possibilities. For me, it's just like, I didn't really listen to music that much, actually. But I think that there's also, I think there's a place for that too. Just even that general idea of, you know, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So almost the fact that it wasn't as much a part of my day-to-day reality. In time, it made me realize how much I appreciated that it was previously part of my day-to-day reality. And it made me identify and work towards just this idea of like, well, what can I do to kind of bring it back, you know?
And I think one of the things that you said that was just kind of, you know, described that so perfectly. It's not that the tables had turned. It's just a new table.
It's a new table, yeah.
Right? And you're just kind of figuring out what that is.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of the pandemic, right? Like it's not that things are different. It's just everything's different.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? It's just a whole new space that we're involved in, and that includes musically too. So, you know, hopefully throughout the course of this podcast, we're going to explore some of those themes and some of those conversations. So we're really excited to get back into it and get back into the flow of this and be able to jump back behind the mic. So thanks again for listening. Thanks for your time, and stay tuned for next time.
Yeah, appreciate everyone, and looking forward to the next.